Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me an extremely special guest. Join me in welcoming Mr. Anand Chandrasekaran, who's one of the foremost product leaders of our time. Thank you so much, Anand, for joining me. Extremely delighted to be hosting you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jivraj. It's great to be here.
Glad to hear that, Anand, and I'm super excited, especially because of your breadth and depth of experiences having built products in the heart of Silicon Valley, as well as for a brief while in India. So, to get us started and understand all about product, I think the good kicking point would be to just understand the fundamentals better, right? And especially coming from you, it'll clarify a lot of the jargon around product. So, if I may just request you to quickly tell us, what product entirely maybe quickly entails, why is it fundamentally important, and how can founders and early stage teams leverage product thinking as a concept to better enhance their products, early journeys, and founding stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the product and the brand are really two sides of the same coin, right? Used to be that you could, separate out the customer experience and the product experience from how people feel about your brand, right? There was a lot of brand advertising, for instance, that was completely separate from what the product did or how it worked and so on. And one of the big changes in the last decade or so is that those are basically like an extension of the same process today, right? And very much so because on the internet, the cost of switching is incredibly low, and as a result, providing a great product experience is the most surefire way of reminding people why they need to continue to stick with your product or service, right? And again, used to be that the switching costs were too high and so on, and some pieces of enterprise software maybe they still are, but most of them are switching to a place where the switching costs are like fairly easy, right? And so from that perspective, if you zoom back, what product oriented thinking is that you're systematically and deeply aligning with the problems that your current and prospective customers are going through, right? And trying to find a sharp articulation of how you can come up with an elegant solution for that, right? And then as technology advances, sometimes things that are not possible yesterday are possible today, and so using sort of advances in technology, right? That's why like you see so much disruption happening, because there was a previous approach to solving a problem that took advantage of a certain technology. And a question that you ask often with product thinking is why now, right? So something may not have been that relevant earlier, and so a great example of this is like we all started to take a lot of pictures on our smartphones, and many of them were poorly lit, or this was like when smartphones didn't have like automatic lighting getting fixed and things like that. So we all had a bunch of really crappy pictures, right? And Instagram came along and allowed us to put filters on that, and suddenly the why now for Instagram is super relevant, because a year ago or a year later, like it wouldn't have been as relevant, right? Similarly, if GPS on phones hadn't come into vogue and become so popular, Uber wouldn't have existed or become as popular, right? So it's also like trying to connect with sort of the marry the user problem with the technology advance, or the moment in time when it makes sense to come up with that solution, and then building on top of that, right? Sometimes there might be a core set of features that you build that barely achieve product market fit, where the users are saying, hey, you've acknowledged the right problem, and you're building the right kind of solution, but for me to like go all in and like subscribe, or delete the other options or what have you, I need X, Y, and Z additional features. And so that becomes sort of what you call the roadmap in building a product.
Wow, that's very comprehensive in nature, and explains the entire circle in product. But there's an interesting phrase that you mentioned, right? Like without achieving product market fit or having achieved it, right? So if you can perhaps double click on that, and given that you've experienced products from ground scratch, you've scaled them, and you've also been a product leader, you have these entire experiences that you can speak from. Also, you've invested in companies that you've seen scale up, and those osmosis returns and osmosis learning is really high. So just talk to us about what founders, if not get wrong, what are some signals to just understand product market fit better? Is there a quantitative aspect to it, or is it purely qualitative? Is it gut based, or is it metrics driven? What are some signals? What do you judge for, and things like that? I think just an intricate explanation of that will be extremely helpful for all early stage teams or operators just viewing this.
Yeah. So product market fit at its very basic level is your core audience acknowledging that your solution actually does start to solve their problem, right? It's that simple. And that is usually shown by action rather than talk, right? So you see it in the numbers where people use your product more often, the retention goes up, the churn reduces. That's probably the metric that indicates that you're on the right track towards product market fit. If let's say there's such a concept as market share, like your market share grows vis-a-vis the previous generation of product and so on. One thing I've seen is like when you have product market fit, you'll absolutely know. I've never met a startup or even a large company where you have product market fit, but like somehow the builders of the product don't know, right? So if you're not maxing out your metrics, by that I don't mean always many fold of your goal, but you're constantly over delivering on your metrics, right? When you're achieving product market fit, if you're setting like reasonable stretch goals for the team in the early stages of the product, I think the mistake that a lot of founders make is largely start to play operator and start to do things like raise a lot of money and hire a lot of people, and act as if they have achieved product market fit, right? When in reality they may not have. Or the other sort of nuanced variation of this is that they haven't achieved strong product market fit, but they could potentially get there. And so even with very weak product market fit, they start growing the business and so on, as opposed to working on doubling down on that early indication and trying to get to very strong product market fit, right? So it's usually shown in metrics like churn, metrics like the time spent going up, if it's an engagement related product. It's also important to like define it appropriately, because look, like the product market fit for a restaurant reservation product is very different from product market fit for messaging product, right? Because for a messaging product, you use it every day and you use it all the time every day, right? And so if you don't have like regular frequent use and like people coming back to it often, that means you're probably not going to be successful as a messaging app, right? But you can't apply that definition of product market fit and success to a restaurant reservation app, because like no one uses a restaurant reservation app multiple times a day every day, right? So if someone uses it like once a month, once or twice a month, your product is probably doing pretty well. So I think like you have to also like zoom back and have like an expected value of product market fit and success and compare reality against that hypothesis that you had for PMF.
That's wonderful. I think, completely, again, I concur with the fact that it's so important to understand priorities better as opposed to just riding with the wave and doing things that may not be as applicable for a particular standpoint. Because the core focus, at least early on, should be to achieve strong product market fit, as you mentioned. And I love the emphasis on it. Like, I think clarifies a bunch of other jargon points that exist in the product world or in the startup world, right? To proceed further, and before we dive deeper into concepts of product, I think it'd be interesting to understand from your experiences as to what you've observed are some of the core differentiating factors in building in Silicon Valley vis-a-vis India, right? I think one of the stark differences and very unique approaches to your career span has been, you've seen the best of both worlds. In India, you were at a time where things were just starting to blow off. And in Silicon Valley, you've seen multiple large tech companies as well as startups, as well as, scale. So you've seen these entire set of experiences. It'd be interesting to understand from your lens as to what you've observed, simply in terms of time spans, as to how India is evolving. What are things that we can still do better, and what are some things which are core to Silicon Valley that we can really learn from, and that can help us become better?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll sort of break that question down into distinctions in the opportunity itself to build great product solutions, and then opportunities, distinctions in terms of culture and approaches. So the what as well as the how, right? So in terms of the what, I would say largely still what's happening, although it's becoming far more nuanced and there's a lot more India-centric solutions rather than the XYZ company in the US built for India. That was the first generation, right? In terms of the opportunity, largely still what's happening is there are interesting categories where market access has not been available for a lot of users, right? And as they come online for the first time, they're demanding access to like high quality products, high quality services, and still, what we're seeing both in B2C as well as in the B2B marketplaces, for instance, and fintech and so on, is consumer services being built to like democratize access of some goods or services, right? So this started with like horizontal products, with the Flipkarts and Snapdeals and Amazons of the world. And then it's gone into verticals now with things like real estate and cars and all of those being digitized. As well, a lot of the old school financial services are also in the process of being digitized, right? Whether it's for an individual or for small businesses and so on. I think I would say in some sense, EdTech is the new e-commerce in India. You're seeing the same digitization of the entire EdTech process to democratize access of various educational products and services, similar to how horizontal products and services were digitized and brought to all of the country through the first layer of e-commerce, right? In the US, those rails had already been built, right? There was FedEx, there was UPS, and so it was arguably a little bit simpler to build just the connectors and the marketplaces, but the rails were already there to deliver in most parts of America, right? But arguably, these companies in the first generation of e-commerce, all of us basically, while I was at Snapdeal, for instance, like we built those rails in India, right? So those rails didn't exist the way they did in the US. And so the concept of full stack is like a lot more real, because sometimes the enabling building blocks are not already there, right? Today, one could argue that some of those building blocks are there as the second generation of companies get built. But we're in that transition from like first to second generation. And now, it's again that market access, like going to the next 200 to 300 million users who are coming online for the first time, right? Whether it's companies like Dealshare bringing e-commerce 2.0, or Oiriksha, which is bringing transportation 2.0 to the next few hundred million consumers. And I think on the culture side, the big distinction is the availability of people who've seen this movie before in Silicon Valley, right? So when let's say Google does really well, people who were a part of the Google success, like they leave and go to Facebook and they help Facebook become successful. And they're not making the same rookie mistakes that they might have made when they were at Google, because they were figuring it out for the first time, right? And by the way, a lot of people who went to Google like came from Yahoo, which was the previous generation, right? So I think like that sort of vocabulary and people with a shorthand and people who've seen this movie before did not exist in India up to recently, right? Now with 50 odd unicorns, there are a few that are like old enough in terms of number of years that people are leaving those and going to the next generation company. And the same dynamic is happening where they've seen this movie before. And so this has never existed before, right? Both founders who've sort of previously had that success and that experience, as well as their management team and their key leaders, key engineers, key go-to-market people, etc. So it's a great sign that dynamic that everyone knew about Silicon Valley is starting to happen in India.
Absolutely. No, again, extremely comprehensive in its explanation. I love how you talk about, the fact that in Silicon Valley, as you mentioned, there have been so many cycles already. There was this, early set of entrepreneurs who become repeat entrepreneurs and things like that, and early teams who've now succeeded. And the same is happening in India. And the road ahead is as enlightening as it could be, and very refreshing to hear for everyone. So thanks for that, Anand. Further, I think, it'd be interesting to just deep dive into some of the different aspects of product and, understand from your wisdom over the years. So, and first up there, it'd be, interesting to know just the qualitative aspects that go into product thinking or product as a role, right? As a function. So, you concurred a bit upon it and, referred to the problem solving aspect, the curiosity aspect, the consumer empathy aspect. But if you can walk us through so many of the other qualitative aspects that product managers need to inculcate in their thinking and their thought processes and workflows to just optimize for better outcomes, I think it'd be just interesting to like just grasp that in all.
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, Jivraj, you're talking about like attributes, qualitative attributes that
Qualitative attributes, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's great. I mean, I don't think there is any comprehensive list, right? But actually, it's funny. I think some of the product leader attributes are very similar to founder or CEO attributes, right? Because you're looking at the problem holistically. You are essentially translating the market opportunity into what the execution plan looks like. You are assembling a cross-functional group of people. I think the one difference is that if you're the founder or the CEO, chances are a lot of people report directly to you. Whereas if you're a product manager or a product leader, not everyone reports to you usually, right? So it's also like getting stuff done through influence rather than through command and control, right? So having a clarity of vision in terms of like why am I saying what I'm saying, and what is sort of the how does the tactical problem that we're talking about right now connect with the bigger picture, right? I think having that sense is critical to tie together people from different functions, right? Sometimes, I sort of use this often in our internal conversations in roles that I've been in, which is it's okay for people to be disappointed, but no one should be surprised at what the plan is, right? So even if I don't fully buy into what it means for my department, right, I actually understand why it's right for the company and why it's right for our overall product. That sometimes I, as Amazon's principles say, I can disagree and commit to the plan, right? Even if I don't fully agree and commit, right? So I think that clarity of purpose, that clarity of thinking is also a very helpful attribute. I think also a very underrated skill is actually sort of seeing the problem from multiple perspectives, right? I've seen product managers get into this pattern which sometimes doesn't lead them to exponential growth, where they become loyal to one solution, right? And they start seeing, it's the classic, the person with the hammer sees everything as a nail kind of mentality, right? And so and this usually happens when someone is an expert at something, right? And so sometimes I feel like a beginner's mind, or like someone who doesn't know what they don't know, could actually be more dangerous in a situation than someone who's a quote unquote expert, who only has like one. That approach is not optimal. They continue to stick with that approach, right? As opposed to being loyal to the problem statement and just exploring a new alternative, or maybe there's a different technology that can be used, or there's a cheaper way of doing it, or all of those functions, right? And then lastly, I would say also developing these cross-functional relationships, right? One thing I've learned through the various roles is that you can be very short-term, win the this round of the battle that you're in, but then no one wants to go to the larger war with you, right? So also like developing the relationships with people and trying to find out what the wins are for them, so that like it isn't constantly about like debating and winning, rather than trying to find out, hey, there is a right solution, but as you have a bunch of resources, it's possible to get things done along the way that are adjacent to what you're planning to do anyway, so that different parts of the company benefit, as opposed to trying to shoot for your own win all the time, right? So in terms of personal attributes, those are probably ones I would add. But I do agree, probably the biggest one that I would look for is just a natural curiosity for this problem statement, and that they're constantly trying to uncover like what's around the corner, and who's experiencing what kind of pain, and how this person can go about solving that pain point.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. All of those pointers are, usually the ones that you would associate with founders, as you mentioned in your opening statement. And I think that's so relevant and interesting to hear in terms of, how product managers can leverage these traits to actually build things that can create exponential value. In that aspect, if I may double click on the fact that context switching is, of course, a debate that a lot of people try to understand better and try to understand in depth. So, as in your experience, what has contributed to your abilities to context switch better? Because, as you mentioned, there are so many different moving parts to building a product, and then there are multiple experiences that go into it. How do you ensure you are true to the statement that is the larger picture and don't get caught up in the multiple different moving parts? How do you deal with the problem of context switching? I think that'd be interesting to hear from a very product oriented lens.
Yeah, so few thoughts on that. One is actually, I should have said this earlier in the list of attributes, but it's
Yeah.
also the ability to say no, right? So just because you're getting dragged into something doesn't mean it has to become very important, right? Like you can dial down the volume of something if you genuinely don't believe that that is a top priority for the product team or for you personally to get focused on right now. And I think, as they say, whatever you focus on is going to improve, right? So you can't focus on a lot of things at the same time. And so one ability is actually is to decide not to context switch and not to focus on everything that demands your attention, right? That said, that's not a choice that's available every time. And so like one thing that I found to be helpful is to actually like bundle up the themes and try to focus on, like, for instance, if you're focused on your own one-on-ones and your team related meetings, or your meeting with your manager, or with your peers, like all the internal meetings that do with the execution, right? So in product, like, it's good to think about like strategy operations and the team strategy operations, right? So start with who's in the team, how are they doing, are they set up with the right resources, etc. Then like what is the strategy to get done with this quarter, with this year, etc., whatever the time frame you're talking about. And then execution cadence and tracking the operations of execution, right? So if you sort of break the entire lay of the land that way, it's possible to bunch up the themes, right? For instance, the team parts you could do on one day of the week, so that within that day there isn't like a ton of context switching, right? And then if you are focused on some customer or partner or external conversations, like those could be bunched up potentially for the same day. There's so actually a well written how Jack Dorsey prioritizes his week focus that I've like used from time to time to see if that makes sense. And then similarly you could prioritize just your individual contribution work, because you're working on whatever you need to get done within the day, within the week, etc. You can bunch those up as well, so that you're not going between sort of being available for everyone and trying to focus on getting your own thing done like at the same time, right? So I think one thing to context switch or to manage context switching is actually to make it thematic, so that you're at least context switching from a larger period to a larger period, right? And also, I think the other thing that I've seen work really well is try to understand like what outcomes are really going to change the game for the business, right? And that way, if you have to context switch through a period, right? Like let's say you're organically building something and you're making an acquisition, right? Those are distinctly different moves that you're making, and they involve, like, one involves actually like a stable focus and the same people, and they know what they're doing, and kind of it's a different energy. And the other is about like integrating new people, making them feel at home, connecting them to the culture, maybe figuring out where their landing spots are as you integrate and so on. So it's a different kind of energy, right? So if you're going through a period like that, at least it's good to know that that's the top priority for the company. And if you're context switching, that there is a lot of reasons to do so, because you're actually solving for the number one outcome for the company.
Absolutely. Love that. Again, I think Tim Ferriss talks about a similar approach where he talks about bucketing to ensure that, context switching can be done in a more streamlined manner. And I love that approach simply because, it talks so much about streamlining stuff. If you have to do it, then do it in a manner that does not involve a lot of micro tasks, because then it's just going to deviate attention. Wonderful to hear that, Anand, and I love this entire flow of thought. But I want to switch the gears and understand more from your leadership lens as to across the years, what have you observed while identifying talent work best for you and vis-a-vis also work best for some candidates, right? Because a large part of the audience set listening in will also be young folks who want to break into product or want to understand the product spectrum better or maybe leverage that as a career option 10, 20 years down the line. So if you could talk to us about that lens of your career and how you've shaped up to become the leader that you are today, I think that would be interesting all in all to observe from and understand.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the biggest one, which I've heard like Keith Raboy, for instance, talk about, is betting on unproven people, right? Like I found that to be a huge sort of recurring theme, right? Now, of course, you want to recruit well-known talent to your team, but you run into problems like their timing and compensation and sort of even egos and things like that, personalities. Whereas I think betting on people who aren't those proven folks before they sort of are quote unquote discovered, right? So I like my entire time in India, every product that we built with the same team that I inherited, right? Because it was a bunch of incredible people. They just weren't deploying product thinking principles, right? And it was really easy to take a bunch of the really smart people and teach them a set of principles, and then reward them on the basis of those principles and give them concrete feedback when they were maybe veering off of those principles, right? And so I'm a huge believer in that. Like whether it's Wink Music, whether it's My Airtel, Airtel Money, Snapdeal, they were all built by people where I think, except for some rare examples, those apps that they worked on were the biggest work, the best work that they did at the time, right? And like Wink Music, for instance, we went from like 0 to 300 million music plays. I don't think anyone in the core team had ever built a music app before, right? Or had come from like a lot of years of experience in music and so on. It was largely unproven people operating from first principles and exhibiting like a strong work ethic. So I'm a huge fan of sort of that. But by the same token, in those situations, communicating the operating principles, even over communicating them, ends up being incredibly important, because you can only like I'm a huge believer in, like, if you want to hold someone accountable to something, they should be clear like what you're holding them accountable to, right? It can't be like an arbitrary and subjective set of principles. And so those principles have to come from what matters to the. So for instance, like we stopped even measuring things like time spent, right? In a music product, we only measured song plays, right? Because we were we were paying the record labels for every month that songs were played or not played, right? So it was in our best interest to make sure a lot of songs were played. So the only metric we measured was the number of songs played every day, right? Unique songs played every day. And so that's a great example where, just by making the qualitative and the quantitative metrics super clear, now we had a very clear definition of winning. The reason I'm calling out that as an example is that those products were actually built inside a telco, right? It's hard to believe globally that any telco in the world would have built some products. So My Airtel, the 3 weeks after it came out, was the number one app in India, number one Android free app in India, right? And we used to get calls from all our friends in internet companies at the time, saying, "I can't believe like you guys are doing this working at a telco," right? So, which is like usually traditionally they're not known for the best designed and best built products, and so I think it's possible to do it in any group, as long as you sort of bet on these unproven people and the principles are clear and there's over communication on what winning looks like.
Absolutely. That's phenomenal to hear simply because, that unproven, like it's always a more refreshing, fulfilling factor if you're betting on them and, contributing to their success as well. And if we have mentors like you, then I think just makes the trajectory even better. But, double clicking on that factor, and I've heard you speak about this earlier as well, when you talk about your angel investments, you talk about, let's say, and I know this is a segue beyond product, but if you could indulge in making us understand how to develop this sort of contrarian thought process, right? Because it's easier said than done, and there are a lot of things written about this, of course. But when you've practically, experience this, practice this to the extent that, you're taking bets not just in terms of talent, but also in terms of your investments or people or companies that are not the coolest, right? Or that are not the trend breakers at that point in time. They're trend setters at that point in time, and it's very difficult to identify them. So in a general sense as well, I think contrarian thought process is very interesting to inculcate. So it would be interesting to just like hear from you what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think most most contrarian thinking like doesn't start because people want to be contrarian about it,
Yeah.
right? It usually starts because you have like a slavish loyalty to the facts, right? And you're willing to change your mind when the facts change, right? And as they say, like you have very strong opinions, but they're loosely held, right? And I think like most of the like the reason it's not very common is because people sort of start with a perception or an opinion or a widely believed notion, and then find their own evidence to justify why they also believe in that, right? Or the facts have significantly changed and have changed for a while, but your underlying belief has not changed because like you're not sort of slavishly loyal to the facts, right? And so I mean, I think like a great example of this is like for the longest time, if let's say customers are being underserved in an area, right? And what we're doing at Five9 is a great example of this, right? So it used to be that there in every vertical, like telco or hospitality or retail, you have a service brand, right? Like they're called service brands, where they use customer service really as a company differentiator, right? So in telcos, it's considered to be T-Mobile. In retail, it's considered to be Nordstrom in the US. In hospitality, like in India, people say that the Oberoi is great at hospitality. So there are service brands in like every vertical, right? And then the question emerges, which is, if technology can increase the bar for what is a service brand, and if every brand can become like 80% of what a service brand does today, right? That's actually quite contrarian in that like service brands actually do a bunch of small things repeatably for a very long period of time, right? And that becomes the brand recall. And what if like a brand that just had a newly acquired product market fit could start being a service brand from day one, because they have the tools and they have the motivation to do it, and it's not as much of a black hole on what it involves, right? So and once you sort of have a loyalty to the facts, and you have a definition of what the opposite path might look like, which actually would be the right path, then technology can really come to assistance for repeat behaviors, and setting the ability to measure if that's being followed, and any adjustments that need to be made, etc. So it's actually great to use technology platforms as a way to actually put contrarian thinking into practice, because it can scale. And especially with AI, like it's possible for some of these to even be partially or fully automated, if not today, in the future, so that not all of it could has to be paid through expensive labor. Like it's possible that technology can come to our assistance there as well.
Absolutely. No, I love that, in the fact that more the best part about contrarian thought is it's not contrarian by intuition, but it's more fundamental by intuition. And if we can follow the fundamentals well, talk about the first principles and practice it well enough, I think it'll just follow and it'll just fit that pattern, if you want to label it that way. So that's very interesting. And as we move further, it'll be interesting to just understand your frameworks of thought, right? I've heard you speak in the past and talk about the movie analogy, and there are a bunch of things that I'm sure help you on the job fit well enough for your roles. And given that now you're looking at a spectrum of things which are way larger and way beyond the spectrum to be able to manage teams effectively and other aspects of your raw job functioning, talk us through how some of these frameworks can help some of us as well, be it in a decision making framework or a prioritization framework, or be it a leadership framework for all that matters, right? So I think all of that combined, it'll be interesting to just hear that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to our conversation about product market fit, right? Ultimately, I think that product market fit is willed into existence by the founders, right? By operators, by founders. As much as it could appear like they were at the right place at the right time, and so on, and it was purely fortuitous. Most product market fit is like willed into existence through like great hard work and a lot of sacrifice and failures and iterations and so on, right? And so the analogy that I use is like if you take sort of an auteur who's like trying to make a movie that they believe that it's an important movie that needs to get made, right? Ultimately, they come up with a vision. They write the best possible manifestation of that vision as a screenplay. They get the greatest craftspeople that they can afford and that will join them. And then they make a great movie. And finally, they have to sell tickets to that movie, right? And so, I'm not a huge fan of like kind of building a product through the average opinion of everybody that you talk to, right? And so ultimately, I think like while you have to listen to feedback, ultimately most founders, I think are able to, through their sheer willpower and belief in that different world that they're building for, they will it into existence, right? Like it is through a combination of like invention and sales and adjusting sort of the perception that folks may have today about something that they're building versus in the future everybody would be using something, and so that's been a huge framework that I've used, and sort of having the spine, if you will, to really deeply believe in your idea and to stick to it, rather than believing in sort of if you talk to like 50 people you're raising money from and you like average the opinion of all 50 feedback and opinions that you get, right? And so and also, I think inherently in building like these complex technologies and products and growing businesses around it, it's an inherent exercise in sort of holding contradictory views, right? On the one hand, you want to be like incredibly focused on the long term. On the other hand, you want to be extremely responsive to data that you're getting that clearly is telling you something or the other, right? Similarly, you want to be sort of flexible in like understanding individual styles, and how people want to work on whatever they're working on, but you want to be like somewhat strict about like the way the company does what it does, right? And the principles of operating at a company, and so you can keep going down that line, where someone can be super sensitive to a personnel issue, especially in a time like this where we're going through COVID and stuff like that, but be relentless about how they expect a work ethic to exist in the company. So I think like that's the other common framework I've seen, is that you're able to at the same time hold these contradictory views that both are true in a different context. And so you're not like kind of going back and forth between these extremes, but you're able to like hold these these seemingly contradictory views, but it totally makes sense in that particular situation, right? And last but not least, like I would say, over communication is becoming super critical, particularly in a remote first or remote centric world, where people want to know what the story is, people want to know what the big vision is, but also people want to know what is expected out of them, right? Like where they're expected to sort of listen to what they need to do versus like what they need to figure out what needs to be done, because that's what you're bringing in really smart people for. And so I think like that becomes in some sense the number one job. Hiring and setting the tone and setting the vision is largely, I mean, after product market fit as the company grows, right? I think building a great team and which gives you personally a lot of management bandwidth back to then like focus on your actual job, as opposed to doing the job that you should have hired well for. I think that's one big part at scale. And the other big part is really setting the tone, setting the vision, setting the communication for what needs to get done. I think those are probably the two biggest parts of, I think, leadership today, particularly in the technology and product side.
Absolutely. Love the fact that you're talking about the over communication aspect, because I think that usually gets missed, and the onus needs to be from both ends and it can't just be a one-way street. So that's very interesting to hear. Further, as we go to the concluding aspects of what has been a terrific conversation, Anand, it'll be interesting to understand from your lens as to how you've navigated your own personal decisions in terms of your career trajectory, right? Because you've come to excelling a pathway which is now become mainstream, but I'm sure at the time it was not as fancy, right? And then you've taken these different pathways to your career where you've been in different companies, built products at the helm of it, and also seen them scale. So talk to us about how some of those decisions have played out for you, any major learnings that you've taken in hindsight from some of those different decisions, different breadths, different depths, and yeah, how we can perhaps take a couple of cues from it, especially at a time when people talk about being generalists, switching from one thing to another, and talking about experimentation. There's so many contrarian views there as well. It'll be interesting to
Yeah.
hear how you have been able to navigate some of those choices.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll maybe start with like what I wish someone had told me a decade ago.
Yeah.
I think when you're navigating these like complex career choices, right? I think the one thing I would say is that if people just felt like they're going to be okay in the end, right? It's all going to work itself out, and just make this decision without any fear, right? Just do the thing that you're passionate about, and not be too worried and too afraid of all the consequences that might happen, right? Because the worst case scenario is not really that bad, right? And so I really hope that, like, regardless of what the specifics of the decision that people are making, or the situation they're trying to navigate, just rest easy in that it's all going to work itself out over a 10 to 20 year period, and this decision that you make is going to be okay, right? And largely, if you remove the fear part from the equation, and make the decision based on what you're in love with, and what you're curious about, and what you're passionate about, and what you're going to learn from this decision, I don't think there's really any wrong decisions that you're making at that point, right? They're just decisions that are moving you forward. And actually, once you get to around 70% or so conviction, I think you should make that decision, right? I personally, I would say I used to spend too much time getting from like 70% to like 80, 90, 95% conviction. And honestly, the cost benefit doesn't make sense after about 70% or so, right? So I would say, like, it's better to make more decisions at 70% conviction, and try to get each decision to 70, rather than either make them at 40 or try to make them at 95% conviction, right? And so, like, that's probably the biggest thing I've learned, is that most smart, successful people are right about 60-70% of the time, right? And so, like, if you are essentially making a lot of 70% decisions, and then not regretting it too much, or not being too afraid of it, that's probably the biggest thing I would say. The other thing is really playing the game for the long term, right? Like, so whether it's physical health, mental health, just being curious about what's going on in the world, it just stops you from fighting yesterday's battles, and helps you focus on fighting tomorrow's battles, right? I've seen like a lot of people who are still caught up in like a mistake that they might have made like 4 or 5 years ago, and like microanalyzing what would have happened if you'd made a difference, right? Like, those are always going to happen in fast moving industries, and if you're making a lot of decisions, but like just pick the learning from it, and there's going to be incredible number of opportunities in the future. Like, there's always this belief that it's like, this is the last opportunity, right? If I miss this one, then there's going to be no more opportunities. I think the truth is, like, having gone through 4 or 5 or 6 cycles in Silicon Valley, and like 1 or 2 cycles in India, these opportunities absolutely keep coming, right? So as long as you're prepared for them, and you're like becoming the best at what you do, right? And developing the work ethic, and the sacrifice, and the focus, and the curiosity, to like just get better every day, right? So like, one principle that I use that I would highly recommend is just get 1% better every day.
Yeah.
And not worry too much about like being someone else being better. It's just, if you're getting 1% better every day, that compounds really, really fast, right? Like, you'll be shocked at like the level of progress that you make over a 12 to 24 month period if all you focused on is getting 1% better every day. So like I would just frame a lot of what I said in that simple principle, which is like pick the thing that you're really excited and passionate about and get 1% better every day.
Phenomenal. I think what I love the most there is not having the inhibition that it won't work out, like just trusting yourself and making those 70% decisions along with the compounding effect and of 1% better every day. I think that's fabulous to hear and great cues for everyone tuning in. Further, I think for one of the last questions, I'd love to understand from your lens as to how mentorship has played an important role for you in your career trajectory, especially given some of the organizations that you've been in have had those Marissa Mayer and other figures that have been really staunch names in the ecosystem. And now that you yourself are at a career trajectory where you're one of the leaders in the ecosystem, how do you look at mentorship when from both directions, being either a mentor to somebody or having mentors to maybe ensure that your career trajectory is moving in the right direction? I think that'll be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this opportunity to learn from all great leaders, and I was just very lucky. Whether it's Mark and Cheryl at Facebook, Marissa joining Yahoo, Gopal Vittal at Airtel, Rowan Trollope at Five9, some phenomenal leaders who are really legends in all in their own right. I think each of them stood for, I think, a set of things that like I've learned over the years. And I would say I'm actually a huge fan also of like mentors from a distance. Like I think sometimes one of the things I've seen is that who to trust around what topic is probably like the most important and the most complex decision you'll ever make for yourself, particularly if you're a founder and you're making important decisions for your company. You can't trust the wrong person for this decision, right? Just because you trusted them around a product decision doesn't mean you trust them around a fundraising decision, right? And who to trust around what decision is like probably the most important thing in those journeys, right? And so I think it's actually better to have a range of mentors and a range of people who you may not even know that well, but you're kind of consulting from time to time about a certain topic, as opposed to consulting or trusting one mentor around all the different kinds of issues, right? Because you don't want to get input from a person who's like a 4 on 10, 5 on 10 on a certain topic when you're making that decision, right? You want to ultimately talk to people who are in the top sort of 1 percentile of that topic, right? And so that's probably the biggest thing I've learned in mentors is it's less the person that you pick, it's more sort of whose judgment you trust for what topic, right? And also like one thing I've learned is it's I try to do it when I'm talking to my mentors as well as I'm mentoring folks, is that like you want to stick to the thing that that is sort of you're the top 1% in helping someone in, right? Even though you might have a opinion in other areas, it's good to paraphrase preface your opinion and say like, that's just my opinion, but I'm not an expert in that area, rather than sort of thrust your opinion on every topic on folks you're mentoring and so on, right? And then the last thing I would say on mentoring is that I've actually found that people have the answers to most of their questions, right? Like I think in most conversations that I've had, like it's good to actually use these mentoring conversations as a way to just frame people's thinking rather than to like spoon feed what the decision should be. And most people just want the mentor or someone more experienced to bear witness to their decision for the most part, right? They just want someone to validate that they were thinking about all the right things and there wasn't a blind spot and things like that. I've seen like really smart founders to be able to, again, develop 70% conviction around most important decisions, right? It's just a question of someone either bearing witness or finding their blind spots or sharing their own personal experience on that topic so that they don't repeat that same rookie mistake or whatever, right? So I think like from a mentoring perspective, the hopefully it's more of a Socratic thinking process to ask all the right questions rather than someone spoon feeding you what the decision should be.
Absolutely. Fabulous to hear that again. I think very, very insightful to just understand that, it needs to be more centric to what is it that you need mentoring for, as opposed to who always, because no one single person is going to have all the answers anyway, and you need to be able to judge that better. And as you mentioned, most answers are within us. We just need that sounding board with the mentors that all of you, and you've had some great ones. And the ecosystem in general is also so supportive and very, very helpful that it just rubs off each other and creates this cycle of helping each other, supporting each other, and cheering for each other.
Yeah, I would. The one other thing I would ask folks to do is just reach out and ask for help. Right, you'll be surprised like how many people will respond. Right, even if you don't know them previously at all, or you didn't get like a very strong warm introduction and so on. So that's again something contrarian that I've found. Like we've all heard how you need a warm intro to get to some of the smartest people in the world. But if you reach out and give people the actual reason to help, and give them like an easy way to give you the help, right? Like just what is it that you're specifically asking for, and not be like vague and wishy-washy in your ask. I think 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, like if someone calls me and says, I'm in this situation, I need a 15-minute call, it's going to be about this, and this is the reason I'm pinging you. If I'm not like in a massive deadline oriented mode, I will absolutely try to help someone out, and I imagine that's the case with most people.
Absolutely. I could personally testify to that 100%, because most of the folks I've been able to, like, been very fortunate to have on the podcast has also been by pure virtue of reaching out on a cold basis, because I felt that, there could be value that could be added from their end. And I had a direction as to why I specifically wanted to host them. And the same goes for you, in fact, right? I did not have a connect with you.
That's right. Yeah.
You were really kind to indulge, and that the result of it is a conversation which I'm sure is going to be super helpful for everyone. So great that you mentioned that point, and I can 100% echo it. Anand, this has been wonderful, and for the final concluding question, I have to be stereotypical and ask you the clean question, where if you have any final learnings in terms of product thinking for early stage founders, because I'm sure everyone's looking out for those final 3 to 5 takeaways that they can leverage and make sure that it's actionable for them as well to just get going, because so much of, again, this knowledge is going to help them build out companies, and hopefully it contributes to their thought process and practical action. So over to you for the last one, but thanks a ton for this amazing conversation.
Yeah, I know. I'll leave something like more directional and something super tactical, right? So it's helpful for folks. The tactical thing I was going to say is something that I've done for over 5 years now, and it's really helped me out. Is the first thing I do Monday morning is that I share with my team the top 3 things that I'm going to work on this week, and the top 3 things that I worked on last week, and what the status is. And it's a great way actually to set the tone. And imagine if everyone in your team did that. It's a great way to also be collaborative and transparent. So that's something I would highly recommend. The leaders do themselves, and encourage everyone in the team to do. It really like sets up like a lot of other good things when you do this right. And it's a very simple thing to do. It takes like less than 15 minutes a week to do that. And then the more broader point I would make is, it's actually possible to get better at product management, right? There are no perfect. There are some great ones, but they didn't become great overnight. And this is absolutely a skill that can be improved over a long period of time, right? So I would just say if folks are passionate about product management, the best place is to start and ask for that opportunity if you're an engineer or a data scientist, or in marketing, or in some other department, and you want to get into product management. We can't have enough people building great products, because every company is becoming a tech and product company, right? Like used to be, there were tech companies and there were non-tech companies, and now every company is a tech and product company. So we can't have enough people using these first principles and customer empathy, and build better consumer experiences. So I would just say start when you feel like starting, and you can get better at it over a long period of time.
Wonderful. I think both of those pointers are the absolute great ones that we could end on. Thank you so much again, Anand, for your time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I certainly took back a lot from the nuances of looking at the larger picture, to being as comprehensive as possible, and to also understand that it's okay to say no and ask for help when required, and thinking from fundamentals. I think that has been my core takeaways from this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Anand.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yuvraj. Yeah, I agree. Like what you're doing here is super special, and I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, and keep doing what you're doing. It's going to benefit so many folks who are listening to your podcast.
That's extremely kind of you, Anand, and it's always been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks a ton for the honor.
Yeah, thanks, Yuvraj.